Kurt, another week, another PBT Extra. First and foremost, before we dive into this NBA Finals series, how you doing? How's your weekend?
I'm well, good. I've been traveling with the finals, so spent some time in Denver, which is a lovely city. Then been out here in Miami and got to go out and have lunch in Little Havana. Got to do,
Exciting.
like tried to take some stuff in. How are you doing? Because you're in New York, and as we're recording this, uh, the entire city is sepia right now. It is just because of the smoke from the Canadian fires.
Yeah, it's been quite shocking actually. It's very hard to breathe, and you can actually taste like cinder. You can actually taste
Right.
the smoke and the fire. And yeah, it's been very strange. I remember when I got home earlier this week, came in, took the subway back home, and I was just like, but it looked as though it was going to rain, like a thunderstorm, but it didn't have that kind of the electricity or like kind of the density that most of those storms kind of have. There's like a stagnant feeling, and then like that electrical charge. And I was like, what is going on? Like the whole sky is dark. And then I call my mom. I'm like, Mom, like, I have no idea what's happening. And then she sent me the article about the fire. And it just got worse and worse and worse as the weeks progressed. So it's really crazy. I've been seeing everyone wearing masks again in the city.
Actually kind of makes sense. I would consider it. I think you'd have to just for your lungs, right?
Oh yeah, I mean I've been staying inside like as
Yeah,
best as I can, but yeah, I'm gonna wear my mask today when I go outside. I'm gonna have to. Like I was outside for 30 minutes I think yesterday, and it's just in my chest for literally the rest of the day for like 8 9 hours afterwards. I was still kind of short of breath.
that's crazy.
Yeah, it is
Wow.
crazy. But so now let's talk a little bit about this final series, shall we? So Nuggets Heat. We saw that both Jokic and Murray had triple doubles. They pulled out, and now they're up 2-1. You're obviously traveling with the finals. What was your sense of Game Three?
I, I don't know. I think my sense would have been the sense that I think a lot of people watching had, you might have had, which is when Denver plays this well, when they're this focused and just kind of in their groove, Miami can't hang. Miami, as good as they are, Denver's ceiling is just higher, and that was a masterful performance in game two, where Jokic was going, Murray another 30-point triple double on his own. Their two-man game. I mean, they were bringing a third guy and blitzing, and it wasn't matter. And then when you start doing that, guys like Christian Braun start just cutting to the rim and making plays. Like everything kind of clicked for them. But more importantly, I don't know how much this came through, Corey. That was their best defensive game this series by a mile. Like they were really locked in on their low rotations, on not letting Bam have easy shots inside, and they were still getting out and challenging the shooters, which is all you can ask. When I mean, their defense the first couple games was not this sharp, and Miami kept getting open looks. They got 16 open looks in game one. They only hit, I think, 5 of them. They obviously were reigning in game two. The Nuggets tightened that up, and that I think is what makes it interesting for Miami going forward. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, what
and
did you
that's exactly what Coach Malone was saying. Coach Malone was like, "Look, we played non-existent defense, and then now you see that adjustment in Game Three." But I agree with you. I think we both knew this coming in. That rest that Denver had was a huge benefit, a huge boon. The altitude was a huge boon. I think generally, not necessarily playing in the altitude, the actual games, although I do think that comes into play. Um, but I'm talking about more training. Having like a
Yeah.
week in this like hyperbaric chamber, if you will, while Miami's going 7 games, and they're getting beat down. And I do think the important thing for me is over the course of time, the better teams win. That's like the secret of the NBA is you might be able to get me for a game, you might be able to get me for 2 games, but over 7 games, right? And it's the same within the microcosm of like 4 quarters. Like halftime, look at the scores, pretty close, right? Third quarter, you start extending, and then in the fourth quarter, when your legs are gone, all the games accumulate on your body. You start making mental mistakes. Great teams don't do that, and they tend to stretch out in the fourth quarter as well. So I think Denver is just, I mean, the better team, quite frankly.
Yeah, they've dominated the first 3 quarters of these games. The fourth quarter has been the Heat. The Heat were plus 21 in the fourth in the first 2 games. They'd come back and obviously won the second one, and they came back. I shaved 10 or 11, 10 points off, I think, in game won. Like they'd really played well in the fourth. It was just ended up being a little too far for them to come all the way back. But they didn't. And that was the other thing. The Nuggets were very conscious and played a really good fourth quarter in game two. And I think, look, they made their adjustments. They made the defensive adjustments on rotations. Little things. Part of the reason Murray got rolling downhill was they changed the screen angle, and it just kind of flummoxed Miami for a little bit and really freed him up. And now it's on Spoelstra and company to do that. But part of that is they need more out of Jimmy, don't they?
Well, I mean, yeah. I think also it would be nice. I know Tyler Hero didn't play. He's still out with the hand. But when he comes back, I'm curious to see how that affects like the wrinkles. Like I said, I think that's really, really interesting. Just we know that, like you're talking about screen angles, being able to confuse someone for a certain amount of time, right? And we don't know how much time, but the reality is that anything's an advantage in a 48-minute game. And I do wonder the adjustment to Tyler Hero again. How long will that flummox, Denver and give Miami Heat any sort of advantage? That's kind of where I'm looking.
I will say, just talking to people around here and talking to people, frankly, who are better connected with the Heat than I'm not sure if we're going to see him. He's still got some pain and swelling in his hand. And so they don't want to push him through that. I mean, it's one of those things where it's the finals. You should push through that. But the other part of that also is if he's not, the last time he played in a game, it was tax day. Like he hasn't.
Wow.
It's been a while, and you're going to throw him into the highest level of basketball in the world. That is a huge ask. That is
That's also your job.
Yeah, but I think first off, I think you bring him off the bench, right? You don't mess with the starting lineup. Mm-hmm. I don't think I would.
Because you're starting.
Yeah, I'd bring him off the bench personally, I'd bring him off the bench for 5 minutes, like 4 or 5 minutes at the start of the second, like when Jokic is out, and see what that looks like. Because he's the challenge with playing him is you can't play him with Duncan Robinson. You might not be able to play him much with Max Strus because he's the worst defensively of the three of them. Like you could zone off a little, you could try some stuff, but again, he's a target, and they already did that a little with Duncan Robinson last night. It's an issue. It's just something that they've got to watch. I think the ideal situation would have been if he could have been back. You could have thrown him in last night at the end of the game for 5 minutes.
Yeah, like, kind of brought him up to speed.
Yeah, but
yeah, I think. Yeah, I look at. Once again, I think it's your job. I understand if you're like, okay, well, maybe in a first round series or whatever, but this is the finals, and like this is for all the marbles. And I understand they've been there 2 times in the past 4 years, or 3 times in the past 4 years. Like Miami's been just living in that space, but it has not been easy. Certainly not this season. And you don't know how many more chances you're gonna take for granted. I remember I was talking to, I was reading something. Sorry, excuse me. I was reading something about this NFL player. Which Super Bowl was first year, and he's like, "Oh, that happens every year, right?" And it took another decade plus to get back to the Super Bowl. This is one of those things where, look, the hand injury, you have to work through it. And I think in this scenario, and any ounce, because think about Willis Reed coming back. I know that different scenarios. I know Tyler Hero is not Willis Reed, but I'm saying 1960, Willis Reed, 1970, excuse me, Willis Reed injured. He comes back on and. Even though the stats weren't there, that emotional charge gave his team the spark they needed to play well and win, right? So I think that's kind of what I mean is there's the intangibles of man, he's pushing through. We got to push through too. We're a team. We're going to get through this together kind of thing.
By the way, you say you can't win every year. That's not true if you're Christian Braun, it turns out. If you're Christian Braun, he'll pay you and win it all to the Denver Nuggets and winning it all. So he just
that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So let's move on with the head coaches. We've been seeing. We knew this was going to be very exciting, and we kind of knew that the first piece, was like, well, where's Nick Nurse going? Now we're starting to see all the dominoes fall. Frank Vogel is now headed to the Phoenix Suns. This is interesting. This is pretty interesting. And then of course, right after this news is announced, Chris Paul waived. Wow. So what's going to happen with with DeAndre Ayton, Chris Paul, figuring out the rest of that roster. What exactly is Frank Vogel inheriting?
First off, I'm going to push back a little on the initial Chris Paul report said they would waive him, and instantly everybody with Phoenix connections, and I reached out to somebody and eventually heard back, but the people who the beat writers and some others pushed back with, no, that's not what we said. We said we were going to talk about a range of options, of which waiving you is, I think, the last resort almost. It's safe. They waive and stretch him and they save $12 million a year. And that's basically mid-level money. And you can go get somebody solid to bring in for that. But you don't, I mean, Chris Paul's still solid. So where's the line there? I think ideally they'd like to find a trade around the deadline for a team that does want to save money, right? That does want to be able to do that, then waive him and save some money. So that's their ideal scenario. I don't know if that's going to come together, but what I think Frank Vogel inherits is a team that, is it just me? I think this fits him because he's a defense first guy, and they keep Kevin Young to run the offense. Devin Booker's guy becomes the highest paid assistant in the league at $2 million a year. He'll be kind of the offensive coordinator. But Vogel, when he was with the Lakers, defense. We're going to build a defense out with at the time they had dueling big men. They kind of Dwight Howard was the main one, but they also had JaVale McGee, and then used Anthony Davis more as a roamer. And we know how good a defender he is. So they built, and LeBron was a little younger, and they had built this really quality defense. And then the offense was good enough, but he gives his guys a ton of freedom on offense. Well, isn't that what Kevin Durant would want?
Yeah, and I think I was really impressed. At first, I was like, how do I feel about this? I went for a walk, and I was like, this is pretty sweet. I think this is a pretty good move. And I think it comes down to a couple of things. One, just to build off what you said, because I agree with you. I think Vogel is very good at star management, and he's good at defense, and defense still wins in the league. It's kind of funny. We always focus on offense, but the great defensive teams, they give you a chance. Like the Lakers were a great defensive team, and they had a real fighting chance there at the end, right? They were actually pretty. So I do think that, plus the fact that Devin Booker can go for 70 points any given day, right? And Kevin Durant, it's really nice to have that kind of offensive power in lockstep with the defense. And I think he's proven that he can handle stars, which in that team, when you're kind of trying to go all in before, the new CBA kind of kicks in, you're going to have to deal with, okay, well, how are we going to put this together? How do we manage this? And how do we make that get to that next level, go above that plateau very soon? I think he can do that. He won in his first year in LA, right? So I do think that he's everything that Phoenix wants.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like one of those scenarios where you got to pinch yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
You're like, wow, this is a kind of a dream scenario. And you have an owner who wants to make moves and wants to spend and wants to win very quickly, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, very much so.
So I think that this is all kind of the perfect marriage for Phoenix, actually.
I like it. He works managing stars because he's basically egoless. He's not trying to be this. He doesn't want to be the face of the team. He doesn't want that. And he gives his stars a lot of freedom and a lot of power. I think that's there's only one of two ways you can manage stars. Either you're, I don't know, Greg Popovich, or somebody with, Eric Spoelstra has a little of this now, and had it before thanks to Pat Riley. You've either got the gravitas to be able to get in their face and say, I'm not going anywhere. I've got, you're going to be with me. We're going to do this. Or you're a little more like Frank Vogel, right? You're just kind of, I'm here, man. I'm not in your way. I'm here to help guide. And I think Vogel's a good fit that way. And like I said, if they can be a good defensive team and they can keep Durant and Booker healthy,
and it's dangerous. It's really dangerous. Phoenix that's what is they kind of took a jump in my mind, in my estimation. I'm like, wow, because before they were like, obviously they have Devin Booker. Then they got Kevin Durant. I was like, wow, this could be really interesting. They just didn't have enough time last season. But now they have all the pieces, and if they resolve this Aiden, Paul, because we don't know, and like I said, I think Chris Paul definitely made this better. But he's just so expensive. I don't know what's going to happen. I know that there's a range of options. We have until, I think, June 28th. Is that correct?
June 28th. June 28th is the buyout date or guarantee date, I should say, for him. Where if you don't waive him by June 28th, you got to pay him the full 30.8, which is a lot of money. And like you said, Chris Paul's still he's still an above average. He's still a good point guard. Like, I don't want to like knock him, but he's not the guy he once was. He's not all pro. I'm all pro and or all NBA or whatever sport we're playing. But he's not that guy anymore. So at 30 is a little expensive, but he's still valuable and he could still help a lot of teams. So if they ultimately waive him, I think he signs with the Lakers. Plays next to LeBron.
Wow.
Just a guess.
Whoa. But I'm just saying, it's just funny because like the whole we saw the Chris Paul experiment in LA with the Clippers and those super teams to go back and try to do it again in the twilight of the career. That's an interesting.
He's wanted to be back in Los Angeles for family reasons, so he gets back in LA. We'll see. I mean, there will be other teams calling from Boston, Philly if Harden leaves. Like there will be calls. Certainly. Teams very interested in him. Like he'll have choices, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's the Lakers.
But it is interesting reading the recent reports because you're right. The reports changed over time. It was he was waived. Then it was like, wait a second, there's a range of options. And then then I'm hearing from his campus is put up message where like, look, we obviously want to play with Devin Booker, and for the Suns team, but give us time to, if you're going to waive me, give us time to go look for other options and kind of do the whole free agent thing. So it is an interesting kind of scenario where if you're Phoenix, this is one of those things where I think you have to be a good partner and make a decision quickly. I know you're trying to figure out a lot of things, there are a lot of moving pieces, but make a decision quickly because he has helped your organization and he has been faithful in that regard. Give the guy a chance. If you are going to waive him, then allow him to go, field those offers and make a decision. But he's kind of waiting on your decision. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah. What about your guy, Notre Dame and former San Antonio Spur Monty Williams getting the bag? 78.5 million over 6 years.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, and I'm very happy for Coach Williams. I honestly think, this is one of the most intriguing landing spots. Detroit is interesting. We can talk about this in the jukebox, but I think it is a very fascinating spot in the NBA. But it is interesting because, and our producer Dan brought this up. I mean, he hasn't won a championship, and yet he is the highest paid coach in the NBA. And he's coming from Phoenix when he certainly didn't lack for stars. It's not like so taking that team to the finals. So I'm curious to see what you think. Do you think the contract is warranted?
What I think they hired him for, more than the championships, is a guy to build a culture. They want a disciplined defense. I think when you look at the two teams still playing in the finals, especially when you're around them like this, that's one of the senses you get from them. There is a true identity for themselves as an organization. And it's not the Lakers, whose identity as an organization shifts depending on who is the star at the moment. And they can get away with that because brand in the market and the stars they bring in. But if you're San Antonio or you're Denver or you're Detroit, or Miami, you better build a true culture. You better have an identity of who you are as an organization and bring in people to fit. I think Monty Williams is a good choice to build that, don't you? Like, as a guy who's respected around the league, who is a strong personality, but like has a set of beliefs and a core of who he is, I think that part works. If he can establish that and build that, then it's worth over the next 5 years, because that's the other perk he's got, right? Like, he got 5. It's a 6-year deal. Is anybody going to question him for 5? Like, this team isn't expected to be good for a while. So he gets some time to build this. If they can do that and then develop Cade Cunningham and whoever they draft at 5 and some of the other guys on their roster, Jaden Ivey into stars, then great. But I think he's there to build something that's going to last beyond this. We'll see if they get there.
I think Detroit, if you look at the landscape of the NBA, I think Detroit's been one of the most patient organizations, because Dwayne Casey was there. Remember, he came from Toronto, right? He was there for a long time in the head coach role, despite the fact that the team was floundering. They still allowed Dwayne to build, Coach Casey, to build a program and try to build some sort of foundation, right? And I think that those years were largely unheralded because he was out there, working hard with these young guys trying to build something, getting, moving past Andre Drummond period, moving past, kind of like going past the Blake Griffin period. There was like a period where it was like okay, who are we going to be? Who are we going to build around? Let's get some draft people, some young draft picks in, some talent. And then now I think they've actually built a pretty intriguing base foundation.
Yeah.
And then now I think it's Monty's job, Coach Williams' job, to build on that. And what's even more fascinating than this is that it's still a continuation, because it's just like the Celtics. Brad Stevens went front office. They put Ime Udoka. Same thing. Dwayne Casey goes front office. They bring in Monty. So it's still a continuation of what the idea and vision is. So ultimately, I think they're building it the right way, through subtraction first, then addition, and then trying to build it from the ground up. And continuity. So I love what they're doing there.
I like it in concept. I think ultimately to win at the highest level, it's the culture idea is great. You still have who's your Jokic, who's your Murray, who's your Butler. Like, you're gonna have to.
You still need 2 or 3 of those guys.
Right.
2 or 3 Hall of Famers.
I'm higher on Cade Cunningham than most, so maybe he can be one of those. I don't know if he's going to be one of those guys, or he certainly could be something very important. I'm higher on him than a lot of guys, but I'm good. I think this blends, by the way, right into Corey's jukebox. Does it?
Yeah, not? let's just dive right in. We got to bring the music in.
We got to.
So I've been listening to a lot of Aretha. So I picked "Young, Gifted, and Black" by Aretha Franklin. This is a song. I didn't know the story. Remember the whole. Sometimes I like to tell you the story behind songs.
Yeah, I love those shows / even TikToks. I get sucked into them. Yeah.
So "Young, Gifted, and Black" was a song written by Nina Simone. The music, was written by Nina Simone. Yes, but it's actually based off of one of her friends. So Lorraine Hansberry was the first Black woman to have a show on Broadway. And she wrote "A Raisin in the Sun."
Oh, wow. Okay.
So apparently she was talking to a group of Lorraine was talking to a group of young Black students. And she said these words, this phrase, "Young, Gifted, and Black," and that inspired Nina when she was just kind of like, it was a seed in her head. So she went to one of her longtime collaborators, and it's like, "I just need you to write lyrics based off this concept that Hansberry came up with, young, gifted, and Black. We need to write the children of America and the children of the world a song to show them, what happens when you are young, gifted, and Black. You're not alone, and to encourage them, to show them what they can be in the world." So, the myth goes that the guy wrote it like, in a traffic jam. He held up traffic 15 minutes in his car in New York, whatever, and wrote down the lyrics. Nina Simone wrote the music. So tons of people have covered it, but this is one of my favorite covers by Aretha Franklin. And I think it's perfect because, it's soul. So Detroit, Motown, it's perfect in that sense. And the fact that this is one of the most young, gifted teams, in the NBA. And it talks about how if you can keep, your soul intact, great things kind of await you. And I do think that that's the case here in Detroit. Like there is a bright future here, given that continuity in the front office and coaching staff and the ownership, and given what obviously the investment that everyone's been doing down there in Detroit. I don't know if you've been like the Gilberts, building downtown, trying to change the face for like over a decade now. So I think that there is a real commitment to long-term building and rebuilding in that city and in that organization. Now they just need to claim a culture. Before it was the bad boys, and I don't know what this one's going to be, but I do think once they get that identity that Coach Williams instills, I think they can be really good for a long time.
That's great. I did not know that story about the song. I did not know that it came out of a Nina Simone background, who was a legend in her own right. And Aretha, everything she touches is hers, right? Like she has such a powerful and unique voice and style. It's kind of like Billie Holiday in the sense that, like, when she touches it, it's just kind of hers.
Oh yeah, I mean, she's unbelievable. The writer was Weldon Irvine, by the way. Anyway, so that's kind of the whole concept for me. Is I think this Detroit team, and I agree with you. I coming out of Oklahoma State, I was thinking Cade, very good. Cade Cunningham, very good. But I I do think that that early injury in his career actually could benefit him, because, and this is going to be weird, but I think when you are young and you're so focused on the grind and you don't know what it's like to not play, I think when it's taken away from you early on, you gotta get like a breath, like a second wind, where everything is, you're a little more appreciative. Especially when, year one you're the face, year two you're injured, and then year three kind of then on you kind of remember, you're like, I remember what it's like to not be on the field. I remember, or on the court, excuse me. I remember what it's like to kind of like to not be the guy, or to not be able to support my team. I don't ever want that to happen again, kind of thing. So I do think this actually is probably a good thing, in the long term of his career.
Did you ever have one of those? Did you have one of those like moments of?
I did, but it came late for me. So it happened for me when I was playing football in Notre Dame. After my junior year, I had another concussion, and then I was out. And I had done so many spring balls because I was an early enrollee, so I'd done like 4 spring balls. And but this one was different because my last spring ball before I retired because of concussions, it was like a breath of fresh air because I was going to graduate in 3 years, and then I decided to come back for my last year to be in student government, and football was not a given at that point. And then I was able to play again, and everything was like so new. Waking up at 6 a.m. and doing training in the snow was like fun, for the first time ever, and going to practice, and like all the hard conditioning drills were just like fun because it was like, oh wow, like I almost didn't have this. And then now like every day is like that for me now when I'm rowing, because I'm like training, and it's like I've been not an athlete for 7 years, and now I'm back like competing again and like trying to train, and it's like everything is awesome because it's like I know what it's like to sit in an office and not compete for 7 years.
I don't want to drive Dan too crazy by going down a rabbit hole, but like how much does joy matter in that kind of situation and your ability to do it?
Yeah, and I think that's why I think is this song, Young, Gifted, and Black. I think there's this idea of like, it's not only a grind, it's not only a job, it's not only providing for people. At a certain point, I think the people who are great, like Steph Curry, like they have joy, it's like they are playing with this childlike joy. Like you watch Messi play and it's like, oh my gosh, like you watch some of the greatest players, I think, across fields, like Rafa. When Rafa plays tennis, you're just like, oh my goodness, it looks like you're having so much fun. And I think they that keeps it fresh. The other alternative to that, because that's a lovely, precious gift, which is in the lyrics of Young, Gifted, and Black. The other alternative is like The Last Dance, where you have to basically be so paranoid, where you have to invent enemies and invent perceived slights to keep yourself motivated. Otherwise, it's just too hard to be to be the best and be an alpha and stay in that cycle of war, unless you just think everyone's out to get you, or everyone's trying to so that is the alternative to keep yourself motivated to play at a high level if it's not joy.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I think as fans, we enjoy the players who seem to be enjoying it.
Yeah, it's fun for like Patrick Mahomes. It's fun watching him play football.
It's fun watching Curry. It's fun watching Mahomes. Frankly, there's some joy in watching Nikola Jokic in these finals where he's like, hey, you just threw down a 30-point triple-double for the first time in finals. Because, yeah, it's just a stat. Like Jokic
and Giannis. Giannis is one of the most fun people to watch.
Can I go home and FaceTime with my horses? Like, that's what I want to do right
now. Yeah. So now let's move to Kurt's Corner, because there's been some news here in the World Cup. So I want to know, what do you think about the Team USA roster? I can name them all, or you can name them, whatever you want to do.
You would probably be able to do it faster than I would, but I think this is an interesting roster. And producer Dan was nervous about this. I'm sure there's other people. It doesn't have an established NBA superstar, all NBA superstar. Well, I get to Jaren Jackson Jr. was close. Jimmy,
Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, you have some improved player with Brandon Ingram, Anthony Edwards. Is kind of having a moment.
But doesn't this feel more like what's next? Like, hey, we're just going to bring a bunch of young, fun athletes, put them together. And I think that's a really interesting group when Jalen Brunson runs the show at the 1. I think with him and having Therese Halliburton's a great combo, because like they're different, but they both lead really well. They're both very, very good players. But Anthony Edwards is ready for a breakout. He started to in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And there's healthy Brandon Ingram is the prototype of guy who does well for USA basketball in these settings, Kevin Durant-ish, Carmelo Anthony. And if you can just go get a bucket, there's real value for you in this, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That's a really good point. That's very, very true. I also, the way that I think about this is, I remember when I was in Tokyo covering the Olympics and Team USA, and there is this idea of the women's team is so hard to make, like 5x5 team. It's just so unbelievably hard to make that the players who like, it's kind of felt like the players who can't make that team play on the 3x3 team. You know, it's kind of like the overflow from the 5x5 team. And I don't know if that's like the right kind of feeling, because obviously they're different sports, you know, but it's also like, you know, there's just so much pride in going and competing for a gold medal. I do feel like on the men's side, it does kind of feel like the World Cup teams, you know, and everyone that they send ahead, you know, is kind of like the overflow, or like the training group, or kind of like the developmental team to maybe eventually join the 5x5 team down the road. And I think that's cool, because I do think that to inherit a team that's going for like 4 straight golds, you know, like to inherit that kind of team, you need to be brought along. You can't just be thrown into the fire. However, it is not very inspiring for people like you and I to look at this roster, you know, as they're training the next crop of Team USA gold medalists. So, but this is part of the process, and I think it's a wise move. But the one thing I will say, though, I think that is a huge detriment, is that the whole idea of the Olympics, Kurt, is being around the best players in the world and learning from them. And I think that's the World Cup too. Like, and that's why I think the other European teams and around the world, they're kind of getting closer and closer to challenging Team USA. And we'll see what happens with Victor Wembanyama. He wants to win gold in Paris. We'll see what happens. Yeah. The French team was close. So I think they get it, that if Luis Scola is playing with the young Argentinian guys who are 18, like he teaches them just as much, you know, if not more, of how to be professional than if all the best 18 to 25-year-olds were playing together. You know, they're kind of like, you know, so I think that's what Team USA is missing, is that, could you imagine if someone was like, you know, like Draymond Green was playing with these guys? That would bring Austin Reeves to another level. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And there is something, I mean, even if you talk to like LeBron and some of the guys who were in Barcelona or whatever, not Barcelona, but some of the other Olympics that I'm going to go pointing up, but they had those moments where they're like, so we showed up 2.5 hours early to get in a workout before our thing, and Kobe was finishing his first workout, and they're like, holy, is this the level? Is this what you have to do to be Kobe? Like, there was moments of, okay, so there's more, right? There's more that can be done. I think there is something to that. I'd love to see a Tatum or somebody jump onto this. I don't know. There's 4 spots left. I don't know if we're going to get that, but I think that this group, if they buy into what Steve Kerr wants to sell and are kind of selfless, and most importantly, and I think you saw this probably better than I ever have, like in person in Tokyo, the U.S.'s advantage ultimately is we are 12 deep with better athletes. Every other country has, even the best, the French team has a couple of guys, 2-3 guys who are that athletic. The NBA rolls out 12, and we can just pressure defense, play with tempo, get out in transition, and nobody can hang. And if this team is deep, with the first 8 are all, like you said, Austin Reeves, and you keep going down the list, it's a lot of good players. You know, if Taylor Swift can let him go for a few days, we can go out there and all those guys defend and run. And I think that makes a really good Team USA.
Yeah, but I think what we've been seeing, especially in the world, you know, like who won gold last World Cup, you know, so I think that what we're seeing on the international stage, and it's filtering into the NBA, is that I think athleticism used to be the thing, but now it's clearly a blend of athleticism and skill and most importantly, understanding of the game. We talked about Jokic. The guy is a back-to-back MVP, and once again, my mind should have won 3, but he understands, I don't need to score 20 in the first quarter. I can get 10 assists. And then eventually they're going to have to guard everyone else, because Jamal Murray now has a triple-double. And in the fourth quarter, I can score 20 points. Like he understands basketball. Like, you know, so I think that's kind of where we don't necessarily see it in the U.S., like with the AAU system. We don't teach that. You know, we teach one-on-one. game or just rely on athleticism. You go to college, and it's just basically a pre-professional program. Do your 6 months and go to the NBA, right? So it's a different, and I think that divergence is starting to catch up very quickly. And I think there's writing on the wall, especially when you look at like who's winning golds in these and who's like challenging US. Now it's not just total dominance. And I still think the old model is in place for the USA. So if that isn't updated, I think it's going to be like some real shocking news coming in Paris where it's like, wait, USA didn't win gold. You know, I think it's going to be like very shocking. It's kind of been a slow thing coming.
We're going to have challenges even in the World Cup because Greece is in our group.
Yes.
Jonathan, by all accounts, intends to play. So
yeah,
that's a very dangerous team once you put him on it, and they surround him with guys who play in Europe, and like you said, those guys have all played on their national team together in groups for. They don't just throw it together. These same groups. I mean, that was always the challenge with Spain. It's the challenge with France right now, who has a lot of talent. Is these guys play together a lot, so they just have a connection that's there that the hastily assembled U.S. teams don't.
Yeah, and I think that's also now another thing. I think there's this exercise of like humility happening in the U.S. And like I said, I think it's going to come in a big way. You know, generally, I think there's like that downfall that happens very suddenly, and I think we're approaching that. And there's been writing, like I said, on the wall. But I just think it's like this idea that we can send players who aren't necessarily like the cream of the crop in the U.S. And the NBA or the U.S. to go qualify, and then we'll hastily assemble a team 1 or 2 weeks before who will then go and we'll just win gold every year, because that's what we do. I do think that that kind of, I won't say it's arrogance, but I think it is going to come back to bite the U.S. very, very soon, because there is that element that we're seeing in the NBA right now. You get an incredible player at the trade deadline, and you have 3 months, and you think you're going to win the finals, and you're not. It's impossible, because other teams who are good have been playing together for 5 months at that point, and they understand, the rotation. They understand like the depth, the bench, like they understand like. So I think that is like we're trying to do what all the NBA teams are trying to do, which is, hey, I wonder if we could just come together at the trade deadline and make a run for it. Like it's not going to happen. No. So anyway,
plus the top talent. I mean, how much we talked about this? Jokic, Antetokounmpo, Embiid, Doncic, 4 of your top 5 for MVP voting this year are not from the U.S. They would not be eligible to play for Team USA's, or well, I guess Embiid's a unique case, but like
but
they're not American born, and that's just kind of the trend now. I don't know that. I think like not that there won't be great American born players coming up through the system, but the next great thing is Wembanyama. Like I think this international influx is where the game is, and as the talent evens out, that connectivity will matter more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the last piece too is this idea of brand. I think in the US, I don't know why this feels this way, but it seems like the international players are more team centric.
Yeah.
You mentioned Jokic and Giannis, and like you can go down the list. Whereas like the great players in the US are more individual like centric. It seems like it's like I want to do deals that give me maximum flexibility, and I want to pursue things that help me build my brand, and I want to be in places where I can do business, and like that kind of stuff. So I do think that also comes into play, like because what happens is it's hard to recruit guys to play internationally because you're not getting paid. So it's got, and it's like, but I'm forfeiting X amount of millions of dollars because I could be filming a movie. Why would I go do that? I already done that. I already did the Olympics, or already did the World Cup. Like it's not interesting to me anymore. I'd rather go film a movie or do this business deal or do whatever.
And it's harder, I think, for the World Cup than for the Olympics. Helps your branding as an American. Like we are ingrained that the U.S. in the U.S. especially that this is a bigger deal than the World Cup. Where I think overseas, and in part because of the cachet of the football soccer World Cup.
Oh yeah.
The basketball World Cup is seen differently than it is here, where it is for us. It's kind of a secondary competition. Oh, we got to go there. We'd like to win. We got to qualify for Paris because Paris is what matters. And that's not necessarily how everybody else sees it.
Yeah. So now that we always end on a fun segment. So this one, Mad Libs. Our Mad Libs today is mascots in the NBA. So out of curiosity, who is your favorite mascot? Because you know who mine is. I mean, the Coyote, obviously. Like, obviously, the Coyote is the best mascot in the NBA. Obviously.
It's funny. I had not been around Rocky, who our producer Dan is quick to point out is the highest paid mascot at $650,000 a year, reportedly. I'd not been around this. I'd seen the Utah mascot ride in on a motorcycle. I think the Coyote might have done that a few times. Some others. He rappels in from the top of the scoreboard at the start of every game, like rappels down, and does some other really athletic, acrobatic stuff that you've got to be trained to do during the game, or they're hoisting him up to the rafters and stuff. It's kind of crazy. So I wasn't familiar with him before seeing him a lot the last couple of games. It's been kind of fun. He buys into everything. By the way, just as a side note, before every game, and I don't think they put this on the broadcast, they do a whole almost 30-second thing about the altitude and what it does to your lungs before every game, so that the visitors can hear it. It's kind of crazy, but he buys into that. So I've kind of enjoyed him as a mascot more than most. I'm not usually the guy paying a lot of attention.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm loyal. I bleed black and silver. I think the Coyote is the best. The Coyote is awesome. Every time I go back home to watch a game, I'm always like, whenever the Coyote, because the Coyote will do he'll work the crowd too. He's like always in the stands. I'm always waiting for a high five. He comes by, and I'm like, yeah. So I got to give love to the Coyote. That he's, I think, the best. I remember as a kid too, because I think the best thing about the Coyote is that his eyes are removable. I don't know if you knew that. They're Velcro. So he'll go up to people and he'll take off his eyes and and hide and give them to little kids and the little girls or the little boys sitting they don't know, they're looking at him and he's kind of looking around with no eyes. They're just holding his eyes. It's very funny. I like the way he interacts and engages with all ages and of the crowd and makes them feel like they're part of the Spurs family. I think that's a big. I think it's not just about entertainment. I think it's important to do all those gags and stuff, but I do think the mascot's job is to kind of be the ambassador to the city, and then make the fans feel like they're part of the family, because they're not going to be able to get coffee with Jokic. But Rocky might make them feel this is my team and this is my city.
I think that's true. That there is a connection to the brand, if you will, or whatever. At whatever, obviously it happens at college too. The other part of Dan's question was there are 4 teams without a mascot.
Yeah.
Lakers, Knicks, Nets, and Celtics.
No, the Warriors.
Oh, the Celtics do have one. You're right. Warriors. All right. Yes. Nets, Knicks, Lakers, and Warriors. Which one do you think should get one?
I feel like Brooklyn probably is in line, right? I feel like you don't mess with the Knicks. I feel like you don't mess with the Lakers.
Yeah. Knicks and Lakers shouldn't have one. Yeah. Just don't.
Yeah, I feel like that is you don't touch that. And I feel like the Nets feel like they just moved to Brooklyn. I feel like there is this idea of we're willing to try something, and they had the whole Basquiat thing where their whole uniforms were all art world stuff. I feel like they're probably the most willing to try something crazy and not have a mascot that is a net. So I don't know
what is the Brooklyn mascot? Is it some hipster that's and the whole mascot's got better things to do than be there and it's just kind of annoyed by the experience? I'm not sure what it is.
I don't know either. I mean, I have no idea. I'm gonna try it. I don't live in Brooklyn. I live in Queens.
The sad thing is there's a consultant that make a 7-figure thing off of figuring out what the mascot should be.
I know. Yeah, I have no idea. But yeah, out of those, would you agree? Is it Brooklyn or do you go Golden State?
Brooklyn. I mean, there was one with the Warriors for a while. They used to have an overpuffed guy who I don't know whatever happened to him. I don't remember what he was called. But they had one for a while. But yeah, I think it's got to be the Nets based on the simple fact that the Knicks and the Lakers, and frankly, there's a couple other teams I would put on that list that have them that I would say don't.
Mm. Well, I'm excited to talk to you next week, Kurt. As always, it's always a great pleasure to listen and learn from you as we talk about the NBA.
One of the highlights of my week, Corey.
See you next week.